Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Audio, video, okay? All right. Good morning. So, we finished with dissent related issues of Article 19, and we covered sedition, we covered hate speech, we covered protest, and we covered the right to strike yesterday. Now, today we are going to be looking at issues pertaining to censorship with respect to Article 19. Now, in the previous year questions of the mains exam in 2014, there was a question which said, what is meant by the concept of freedom of speech and expression? Does it cover hate speech? And why are films on a different plane as opposed to other forms of expression? Now, the reason why this was asked in 2014 is because 2014 was election year, and we all know what happens in elections. You know, people say things that they are not supposed to say, and it incites a lot of communal, and other forms of ill feelings. It was also in 2014. It was also in 2014 when you would remember that the censor board was undergoing some extremely important changes, was undergoing some extremely important leadership sort of changes, right? So that's kind of important. Now, with that in mind, there was a context to why this was asked in the context of Article 19, right? Now, when we study censorship, of course, the two broad areas where we should be referring to and we should be focusing as far as censorship is concerned are films and OTT platforms. Films and OTT platforms. And OTT platforms, as you would know, OTT platforms, as you would know, comprise of Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Hotstar. These are streaming platforms, and we're going to study both of them in the context of censorship as far as Article 19 is concerned. Okay, so let's start and let's get down to studying. The primary difference in terms of how we look at these two elements is this, that films versus OTT, and let's understand why films. Films are actually regulated by the state. Films are actually regulated by the state. Okay, they are externally regulated. They are regulated by the government through an organization called the Central Board for Film Certification, which is also called very popularly the Censor Board, right? Which is also very popularly called the Censor Board, right? Now, if you compare this to the rest, OTT platforms are actually self-regulated. This means they are regulated by themselves by certain organizations such as the Indian Broadcasting Federation or the Internet Mobile Association of India, right? There are several, and when we say self-regulated, they are multiple self-regulated organizations. So for example, there is going to be an organization A which will have, say, Disney, Hotstar, Netflix, Amazon Prime, things like that. There will be another organization where some other OTT platforms, would be self-regulated, right? So they're self-regulated. And as far as the laws is concerned, as far as films are concerned, you have what is called the Cinematograph Act. You have what is called the Cinematograph Act, which primarily regulates films, whereas as far as OTT is concerned, it is the IT Act which allows for the formation of the IT rules, which were released as recent as 2021, which were also heavily in the news for regulation of OTT platforms. So that's the fundamental and the basic difference between the way films versus OTT platforms are regulated, right? Films are regulated by the state, whereas OTT platforms are regulated in a self manner. Though there are laws which sort of govern both, you've got the Cinematograph Act, and then of course you've got OTT platforms. Right now, with your permission, and if you would like, I'd like you to if you would want, I'd like to walk you through a journey of film censorship in India, just to give you an idea as to what things were, how they were, what are we doing, and so on and so forth. So, if I have your permission, I'd like to walk you through the journey of films. The journey of films is never going to be asked in the exam, but it will give you a lot of context to what we are talking about, if that's okay with you. Now, the basic idea or the basic premise as far as film censorship is concerned is this. When we talk about film censorship, there are certain basic principles of film censorship, right? As I told you, the primary law governing film censorship is the Cinematograph Act. Right? Now, this act allows for the creation of something called the Central Board for Film Certification, which is called the Censor Board. And very interestingly, if a filmmaker, or if let us say a director has a problem with the kind of decision that has been given by the censor board, then you could have, now you can't, you could have appealed to the Film Certification Appellate Tribunal. The Film Certification Appellate Tribunal, which is also popularly called the Censor Tribunal. Now, the basic difference between the Censor Board and the Censor Tribunal was that the Censor Board comprises of officials which are completely and thoroughly appointed by the government, whereas the Censor Tribunal will have government as well as judicial members, therefore creating a lot of transparency, creating a lot of accountability. Now, why are we talking about this? Because in 2021, while on one hand the OTT rules were being conceptualized and were being framed, on the other hand, the government has abolished the Censor Tribunal as a part of the Tribunal Rationalization Act, which wanted to reduce the number of tribunals as they were not fulfilling the purpose as to why they were created. They were not substantively adding to a specialization of cases, and they were not substantially decreasing the case workload which exists in India. So there has been an impact of this, and therefore we must study the impact of this and how this will largely affect censorship in the context of Article 19. So broadly, this is the framework, and it is the censor board which works on the principle of pre-censorship. Now, pre-censorship means the first people who get to see a movie in the country are actually the censor board, and only once they approve of it will that movie be shown to the public at large. So, which means that they have two options. Either they can accept or they can permit the release of the movie, or they can decide to not permit the release of the movie. They can ban the movie. Now, if they decide to permit, they can permit the movie as it is, or they can suggest certain cuts to the movie, which means certain portions may have to be removed from the overall movie. And this can be done. After this has been done, the censor setup works on a certification basis. It works on a certification basis. Now, a certification basis means that you would have seen this. For example, universal for all audiences, adult is only for adults, UA means under adult supervision. Then you have a certificate called S, which means only for a specialized audience, like only engineers or only doctors or scientists can only see that kind of a movie. So there are different kind of certifications that exist in film censorship. Now today we are also implementing similar certification in OTT platforms also, but the certification is a lot more diverse. So you have the age of 7, 13, 16, 18 and so on and so forth. I'll come to that certification later, but this is the larger framework, or this is the larger ecosystem through which censorship runs in the country. An extremely interesting and an extremely sort of good way to go about this. So I'll give you about 1 minute to write this down, and while you are writing this down, I'll explain the same thing again to you. I'll quickly revise this to you so that you're able to understand this as clearly as possible. Okay? So whenever you are ready, you can start noting this down, because this is very interesting and very important. So I'll also explain the same thing to you again. Basically, just to revise this for you, we're looking at the relationship of films and Article 19, and we're of course looking at the restriction on films. The restriction on films is of course an issue with Article 19. The primary legislation on the restriction of films, the primary legislation on the restriction of films is the Cinematograph Act, which allows for the creation of a statutory body, because the law is helping you create the body, which is why this body has proper powers, has proper certification powers. This is called the Censor Board, or the Central Board for Film Certification. And we used to have a censor tribunal which has been abolished in 2021 through the Tribunal Rationalization Act. Now, the censor board in India works on a pre-censorship basis, which means they are the first people who get to decide whether a film is going to be released or not, right? And then once that happens, they can either permit or they can decide to not permit the film. If they do decide to permit the film, then the permission of the film is either done as it is, or or it is done very specifically. It is done very specifically with a certain amount of cuts, and then certificates can be given, or you can decide to ban the film entirely, right? So this is the broad framework. Now when I get into the history of this, I'll get into the technical details also with respect to how the first edition of the law came, then the second edition, and so on and so forth. I must also very clearly tell you that when I discuss the evolution of censorship in India, you must understand this, that the evolution of censorship in India is not particularly going to be asked in your exam, so you don't have to worry about it. But in case you're about to write an essay on films or entertainment or censorship or dissent, or there have been previous year essays on whether films are a reflection of society or society is a reflection of films, then you should be able to write some amount of a historical context as far as censorship is concerned, because it sort of becomes important. Okay, so let's understand this and let us try and get this right. Okay, so just listen to me first. The idea is, of course, now OTT platforms are a reality, given the fact that how cheap internet is, how well internet has penetrated into the mainstream of India's society. And not only this, we also understand that the technology is available, and the basic advantage that OTT platforms have is that they are able to provide an anytime, anywhere kind of an entertainment, which means you can watch it at any given point of time, and you can watch it without the barrier of a geographical location. unlike films, where in films you have to go to a theater, which is also now getting diluted because now films are also getting released on OTT platforms. But for the purposes of this discussion, let us spend some time understanding why are films so extraordinarily important. Why are films often considered to be so impactful and so important as far as this is concerned. So let us start and let's understand what it is that we are talking about. Okay, all right. So let us start. Now, a gentleman in class right now, right? A gentleman in class right now, Shri Nikhil Banya Durgam has asked, Sir, who is the chairman or the head of the Central Board for Film Certification? What I should tell you is that the chairman or the head of the Central Board for Film Certification has always been a lateral entry. These are not necessarily bureaucrats. They are never necessarily bureaucrats. But if you're asking who the chairperson of the censor board is, today it is Prasoon Joshi. Okay, a very eminent media personality. But anyways, this will not be asked in the exam at all. But anyways, so let's continue. Okay, so let's understand this. Let's understand what it is and how does this work and what are the larger discussions around it. Okay, so as we understand that the censor board is basically a statutory authority which was set up under the Cinematograph Act of 1952. Now, this is the primary legislation under which a statutory body called the censor board has of course been appointed. It has some regional offices also where you can regionally go and submit your films and so on and so forth, but that is something which is not particularly relevant. Right now, let's get down to discussion and let's understand what it is that we are referring to. Okay, now, so as I was telling you, in terms of how powerful a medium films are, they're often considered to have a wider impact, a more substantial impact on the masses than other forms of medium. Like for example, most people in the country will not read a newspaper, will not listen to a radio, will not probably get a bulletin delivered to their house. But because films have an inherent entertainment value and they have an experiential value to them, so they end up having a large mass viewership as other forms. Today that is of course changing a lot because of the because of OTT platforms. But we know in India for so many years the films have had such a great impact on what we are today. Right now, interestingly, this Cinematograph Act that we know of 1952, of course we changed it after independence, but this has always been a part of any democratic society, and this has also been a part of India also. So in fact, the original Cinematograph Act actually dates back to the 1920s, right? That's when the British had introduced the original Cinematographic Act. This was also around the same time where India's first ever film, if you remember, Raja Harish Chandra was released. So around the same time, in the context of the same time, the Raja Harish Chandra was released in 1934. So about 10 years before this, the Censorship Act sort of came into being. Just as a small trivia, that in 1934, India's first ever film, Raja Harish Chandra, was released, and the Censorship Act was also, there was a Cinematograph Act in place at that time. And very interestingly, at that time, before independence, we did not have a national censor board. We had regional censor boards. We had a regional sort of organization. There was one in Bombay, there was one in Calcutta, there was one in Madras, there was one in Lahore, there was one in Myanmar also, which is called Rangoon, which is now called Rangoon, which is now called Yangon, which was previously called Rangoon and is in Myanmar. So there were several regional um, censor board offices, and they had regional jurisdiction. So if you're making a film in the Lahore region, you'll go to the Lahore board or you'll go to the Lahore authority, get permission from there, and it would get released in the Lahore region. Then if you wanted it to be released in the Calcutta region, in the eastern part, you would go there and get a certificate from there. So we did not have in a pre-independent setup, and that's the sort of point you must understand, that in pre-independent India, in pre-independent India, what we had were regional boards with regional jurisdictions, regional boards with regional jurisdictions. And today, in 2021, of course, post 1952, we have a national censor board which has branches, but there is a national release certificate that is given. So in India today, we've moved from a federal censorship ecosystem to a unitary censorship ecosystem. I hope you're appreciating the example that I'm giving you. We have moved from a federal sensitive ecosystem to a unitary sensitive ecosystem, wherein there is a national sort of a censorship law in place and in a national sort of a censorship guideline in place, right? So this has been one of the key features of how censorship in India has evolved over a period of time, right? So that is that. Now, of course, later this was all merged into Bombay, and now, of course, we have a national censor board and all of those things. Okay, understood this? Yes? Clear? All right. Yeah. Now, I'll give you some interesting examples that you can write, and the examples that I'm giving you are not politically sensitive examples. So, therefore, they're substantial examples, but very, very good examples, which I had to search from like a lot of research. I'll give you these examples that you can write in your exam, right? So, let us say we are talking about 2002, right? So, in 2002, there was a film called War and Peace, right? There was a film called War and Peace. I don't remember the name of the director, but if I can, I think it was Anand Priyadarshan or somebody. Anand Patwardhan, I think, was the director of this movie called War and Peace in 2002. Right? This movie had actually shown some scenes of nuclear attacks, and this had also, it was basically a movie about how the dimensions of war have changed over the years. A fantastic movie, beautiful movie, right? Now, this movie, which was directed by Anand Patwardhan, had scenes of nuclear testing, of course, had shown certain scenes with respect to nuclear bombing in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and also had shown the damage caused by the 9/11 attacks in the US. The 9/11 attacks, if you remember, these are we call it 9/11, and this is where a lot of people often get confused. When we say 9/11 attacks in the US, you must understand the US follows a month day format, and we follow a day month format. Okay, so when we say the 9/11 attacks, what we mean is actually the 11th of September 2001. As you would remember, the twin towers of the US had collapsed. So this was the movie, and this movie essentially was sent to the censor board, and the censor board recommended more than 20 cuts to the movie. They had objections to the brutality and all of those things, right? Now, obviously the director had a problem with this. The director approached the court, and then the court declared these cuts to be unconstitutional and ordered that the movie must be released as it is in its form, which means now this is around the same time, but the tribunal does not exist. The tribunal came for a few years and has been abolished now, right? Now, now, Very interestingly, this means in the whole censorship ecosystem, the judiciary will also play an extremely important role. Like for example, originally what used to happen was censor board give you a certificate, you had a problem with it, you went to the tribunal, you further had a problem with the tribunal, you can go to the Supreme Court or the High Court, right? So that was the ecosystem. Now the tribunal has been removed, which means now you'll have to directly go to the court. So 2002 was an extremely interesting example, right? Then in 2003, I'll give you some very good examples. There was in 2003, there was a beautiful, again, a beautiful movie called Gulabi Aina. Most of you would have not heard of this. Very, very good movie, Gulabi Aina. And this movie, I would definitely say, was a movie ahead of its time. This movie was directed by somebody called Sridhar Gangayan. I'm not sure. I think Sridhar something. The directors are not important, right? So basically, what happened was no. Uh, Praveen is asking, sir, Raja Harishchandra was released in 1930. That is the movie which you're talking about, Dada Saheb Phalke. I'm talking about the 1934 movie which was directed in the Tamil language by a Tamil director, which is where it really, the censorship motions really start getting into it. Okay, Raja Harishchandra, the original movie was in 1913. There were renditions of Raja Harishchandra in 1950 also, beta. तो प्रवीण आपसे एक छोटी सी रिक्वायरमेंट है कि बेटा मैं पढ़ के आता हूँ, मैं रिसर्च करके आता हूँ, मैं फैक्ट्स करेक्ट करके आता हूँ. सो डोंट वरी अबाउट इट, राइट? इफ दैट इज ओके विद यू, है ना? अगर आपकी इजाज़त हो तो थोड़ा सा विकीपीडिया ना खोल के बैठे, क्योंकि आपने विकीपीडिया सर्च करा होगा तो पहला आपको दिखा होगा राजा हरिश्चंद्र 1913, बट ऐसा नहीं है. आप क्लास पे ध्यान दीजिए, गूगल क्रोम में सर्च करके आप स्मार्ट बनेंगे, मेरे पास उसका काउंटर हमेशा रहेगा. बहुत समय हो गया, दाढ़ी मैंने सफ़ेद कर ली है, पढ़ते हुए दाढ़ी सफ़ेद हुई है बेटा, ठीक है? देयर इज एक्चुअली राजा हरिश्चंद्र फिल्म इन 1934 विच वॉज मेड डाउन साउथ इन द तमिल लैंग्वेज. ओके, तो अगर आपको कोई दिक्कत ना हो बेटा, तो आपकी इजाज़त हो हाथ जोड़ के तो मैं पढ़ा लूँ, ठीक है? चलिए, इन 2003 गुलाबी अन्ना, as we talk about it, okay? Gulabi Anna. Now, Gulabi Anna was a very interesting movie, a very, very good movie, which was actually, as I was telling you, the 2003 movie of Gulabi Anna. This movie was about transgenders in the country, or transsexuals in the country. Okay, now this movie was ahead of its time. This movie wanted to reflect, the atrocities or the issues of transgenders slash transsexuals. This movie was severely objected to by the government, and the censor board said that the film contains certain portions of vulgarity. The film contains certain portions of objection, and therefore this is a film that will not be released in India, and the government had banned this film. This movie was released internationally and won a lot of a lot of international accolades, won a lot of international recognition and all of that. It was a very, very well appreciated movie, which was not allowed and was banned in India. So again, this movie was completely banned because, of course, people had an objection to this. Then in 2004, again, a very, very interesting movie. You can understand why we are talking about 2004. This was a movie as much as it was a documentary. So when we say a movie, a documentary also includes, I mean, a movie is anything which is for theatrical release. Even a documentary requires a censor certification if it has to be released in the theaters. So anything which has to be released in the theaters will require censor certification. It's that simple. The math is that simple. Now, For example, if today there is a movie which also releases in the theaters and also releases on Netflix, then you'll have two different certificates, one by the censor board and one by your self-regulator of the OTT platforms. Anyways, in 2004, a very interesting movie called The Final Solution. Okay, a very interesting movie called The Final Solution was made. This was actually a documentary, right? This was actually a documentary which was about the communal clashes between Hindus and Muslims. And this movie had also shown, very extensively the Gujarat riots of 2002, where, if I remember my statistics, and some of you can Google the statistics and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think more than 1,000 people died in the Gujarat riots of 2002. Now, of course, the censor board had taken this to an absolute offense. They said, if we release this movie, there is going to be a higher chance of there going to be communal violence, or there could be a ban, and there could be a lot of societal clashes. So of course, this movie was originally banned, but then there were several protests, there were several demonstrations, and then in 2004, after a lot of demonstrations and protests, the movie was finally released later in October 2004, after a lot of demonstrations. So there were certain objections, but then the government had to uh, uh, sort of pay heed to this, which also gives you a very interesting insight that the way the censor board looks at a movie also has a lot to do with the public sentiment, with respect to that movie, right? With respect to that movie, right? So that's also something very important to note. Right now, then let us say, I'm sure you would have heard of this movie also from a very popular book in 2011 called The Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Right. Now, this was an American film, which the censor board said will require approximately 5 cuts, and because these cuts needed, there were some sexually objectionable scenes. There were some scenes depicting rape, which was objectionable to the censor board, and then only when will the movie be allowed to released to be allowed to be released. But the producer of the movie the producer of the movie very clearly said, if you are not allowing the movie to be released as it is, I will not let the movie be released in India at all. So he decided to not release the movie in India at all. This movie was never officially released in India. Very important. Then in 2013, you would remember a Kamal Hassan film called Vishwarupam. A Kamal Hassan film called Vishwarupam. So the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was, of course, an issue of sexual activity which was demonstrated. Now, with respect to 2013 and, of course, Vishwarupam, this was a Kamal Hassan film. The problem with the Kamal Hassan film was that it was also banned for a few weeks because of the sensitivity of it, because people thought that it had disobeyed certain regulatory practices, and it was banned in Tamil Nadu for some time, and then it was released eventually. So these are some of the examples that we can use as far as the movies are concerned. I'll also give you some more examples that you can write, and you see each of these examples are giving you a different sort of a perspective. Like 2002 is about an international event, 2003 is about a social issue, 2004 is about riots, 2011 is about sexuality, 2013 is about internal procedural problems. So there have been several such kind of movies, which were often issued, sort of, stopped, and therefore not allowed the movie, right? Now, very interestingly, 2015 becomes a very important year. Now, what happens in 2015 is there was actually a movie called Chayam Pusiya Veddi, right? Chayam Pusiya Veddi, a South Indian film. And I know it's objectionable, I should never say South Indian film, because there are so many different kind of South Indian films, but this is not a Hindi language film, right? This movie basically, the movie translates into the painted house. So Chayam Pusiya Reddy. So this movie was called Chayam uh, Pusiya Veddi, which is basically meaning the painted house. This movie had explicit nudity scenes of the main actress. There were three visuals and an audio which was objectionable, and the directors were asked to remove those scenes. They said we will not remove those scenes, and therefore the censor board cancelled their certificate and did not allow for the movie to run. Now, this is around the same time where you see some leadership issues, some organizational issues with the censor board. So it's actually in 2015, very very popular lead, very popular man. He was, an extraordinary sort of personality in media, and she was somebody who was fantastically well known, Leela Samsung. And Leela Samsung resigned as the chairperson of the censor board because of interference in the work. Leela Samsung was a very well known Bharatnatyam dancer. She was a very well known folk artist. She's also been politically also well connected, all of those things. Of course, she was a recipient of a number of awards and so on and so forth, but she primarily resigned from the censor board in 2015. And one of the reasons that she resigned from the censor board in 2015 was because she was not willing to give a certificate. I don't know if you remember this movie called Messenger of God, right? There were sequels also which were released. There was a lot of political pressure to give this movie a certificate to release, and the man behind the Messenger of God, I think today is in jail because of several crimes that this person has committed. So in 2015, Leela Samsung resigned. She said, "I am not going to do this," and then Leela Samsung was replaced by this extraordinary gentleman called Pankaj Nilhani, right? Pankaj Nilhani. Now, Pankaj Nilhani was a very pro-government, a very pro-ex person, which is why now you see in 2014 you are getting a question in UPSC with respect to why are films, because do you see the controversies that are happening around here? This is around the same time why there are questions being asked. Now, Pankaj Nilani, when this person became the censor board chairperson from 2015, I think till about 2017, and Prasun Joshi is now the chairperson 2017 onwards. A lot of people, at least half of the members of the censor board resigned, saying that we cannot work under this person because of certain work ethics and so on and so forth. And it is post 2015 that we see a very different side to the censor board. One of the movies that we are referring to is called Udta Punjab. I'm sure all of you would have heard of it. Udta Punjab. Now, Udta Punjab was a movie which was produced by a very well-known director called Anurag Kashyap, right? And Udta Punjab, therefore, was a movie which depicted, the drug crisis, which also depicted the youth into drugs, the political, nexus, the inaction of the police. It was a very sensational movie. I think Ekta Kapoor was also one of the producers in this movie. Anyways, the motive of the movie was essentially to show the drug problem in the state of Punjab. The motive of the movie was to show that this is what the Punjab of today is. This is what a drug sort of a drug menace is there in the very basements of the Punjab that we know as the heartland of the agricultural revolution. Right now. Of course, this movie had, some very objectionable scenes, had a lot of bad words, cuss words, swear words, right? And of course, the the censor board said you need to make approximately 100 cuts to the movie. I think the number was 90, 95 or something, but about 100 cuts to the movie. And it also said that you will have to, one of the 100 cuts was that yes, Baba Ram Rahim, absolutely Varsha, yes. So one of the cuts in the Urta Punjab that the censor board recommended was that the names of the places, if you look at it, in terms of, the names of the places which were mentioned from Punjab, where a lot of these drug activities were happening, the censor board asked the directors and the producers to remove those names and change them with fictional names or whatever. Right now, of course, the makers of the movie appealed against this decision in the High Court of Bombay, and the High Court of Bombay said nothing doing. Right, the High Court of Bombay said nothing doing, because very interestingly, the High Court of Bombay was very clear that this is just a movie, and a movie is perfectly fine, and when the High Court of Bombay actually cleared the movie, instead of 100 cuts, the Bombay High Court only approved one cut and said all the other cuts should be disregarded and the movie should be released as it is. And something very interesting happened. The torrent of the movie with the stamp of the censor board was leaked, which means the movie which had gone for censor board approval, that edition of the movie was leaked. So people thought the censor board has leaked the movie, or somebody in as the officials, somebody who's a part of the censor board had leaked the movie. However, all of this happened, and let me tell you that this movie was a huge commercial success. I think made more than $10 million, as the movie, right? So that is something which we must also know. Then in 2017, you would have heard of a movie called A Lipstick Under My Burqa. You would have heard a movie called Lipstick Under the Burqa, right? Lipstick Under the Burqa. Lipstick Under My Burqa. Fantastic movie, exploring and sort of bringing to light that it is not only men who are sexual beings, even women are sexual beings, and everybody has the right to sexual gratification. Right? This movie was directed by one of our generation's most talented directors, Alankrita Srivastav, and this movie was produced also by a very daring producer, Prakash Jha. Right? This, of course, had an issue with the censor board, that how can women be sexually having sexual urges? Only men in this country can have sexual urges. So of course, they said that the censor board in their official statement said that this movie is tending to the fantasy of the women. Arey bhai, why if men can have fantasies, women can also have fantasies, right? So they said that this movie is not going to be released, and therefore because it contains certain scenes, certain words, certain audio visuals. But this movie was, of course, screened all across the world at more than 35 international film festivals, and won more than about 10 to 12 awards. And it so happened that this movie became eligible for India's entry into the Golden Globe Awards, which are very prestigious film awards given to movies all across the country. Of course, the director then moved to FCAT, because the tribunal had been existing by then. So and in fact this tribunal was created in 2017. So between 2017 to 2021 we had the film tribunal. So in 2017 the directors went up to the court, went up to the tribunal and said this is not okay. The tribunal asked the filmmakers to make a certain number of cuts and asked the movie to be released with an A certificate, and the movie was of course released with A certificate, right? But chalo theek hai. As long as the movie that was delivered with the same message with which the movie was created, the director agreed and the movie was finally released. So these are some of the examples that you can use, right? And these are some things that we should know, right? Now, what do we understand out of this? Right from 2002 till Lipstick Under My Burqa in 2017, we understand that there is always going to be a section of society there is always going to be a section of society who is always going to be upset with the movie. Is always going to be upset कि इसमें ये सही नहीं है. For example, you would remember that historical film starring Deepika Padukone and Ranveer Singh, Padmavat. Somebody other will always have a problem, right? And of course, this movie is often made to leave a message to society, or is to reflect societal realities upon society itself, and that should be a free medium, right? And therefore, this is very important, that movies are indeed a form of expression. Movies are indeed a form of representation of art. They are a creative expression. You have to give creative liberty for movies to exist, or even for series to exist. For example, if you look at Netflix today, and we're not talking about movies at the moment, there are so many renditions. There's a very popular series on Netflix called Crown, which is about the life of the monarch of England. Now, at least 20-30% of that series is a creative adaptation. That did not really happen. But you can't have that creative liberty in India. You really can't. Unfortunately, we are a very, very conservative country when it comes to creative expression, right? So you must understand that there is a lot that needs to change. So what are we talking about, right? Let's understand this. Of course, if a movie can potentially cause a riot, then no doubt the movie should be restricted. It is not the censor board's fault that the people of the country are not able to differentiate between what is right and what is wrong. And given the levels of functional literacy, you can't put law and order and security at stake. If some people have an objection to a movie, they go onto the street protesting, and an innocent bystander gets killed or hurt in the process, the only person responsible is the government. So if the government wants to be precautionary about it, it's fine. That is okay. This is your first stand. That a movie which is severely objectionable and you think can cause a law and order problem, restrict the movie. No problem. But also at the same time, making sure the cinema halls should also be periodically checked, that the movie which is approved by the censor board and the movie that is being shown in the cinema hall, they're actually the same movie. Because in regional cinema, this is often that happens because nobody really checks. So what the censor board agreed to and what the movie has been declared as, of course, they're two very different things. So that's the second part. And third is that even if you give an A certificate, a lot of people who watch adult movies are actually minors. So there is no way that is checked, right? So this is the censorship story. This is more than enough information for you to worry about, as far as your answers are concerned, as far as your mains is concerned. I've also given you like a write-up on it. I'll just run you through the write-up so that it's easy for you. You already have it downloaded, right? Right. Now comes the second part. We've discussed censorship as a whole. Now we must understand the impact of the abolition of the tribunal. As I was telling you before, and I was telling you before, that we had an internal mechanism because the censor board was primarily appointed by the government. Now you had a tribunal, but the tribunal does not exist because it has been abolished by the Tribunal Reforms Act. Okay, it has been abolished by the Tribunal Reforms Act. Okay, so let's understand this as clearly as we can. Chali. So what happened? This has been passed. This has been executed. The film certificate appellate tribunal does not exist. Now please understand, why does this happen? Two things have happened. Now you have to be very clear about this so that you understand what we're talking about. Now when we're talking about regulation of cinema, you must understand what has actually happened. अरे ये क्या है? Right. So the first step is that the film certificate okay, the film certificate appellate tribunal has been terminated. There is no such thing called the film certificate appellate tribunal. Now, that means there were some functions that they were doing. Now, what the government has done is, apart from abolishing the terminal, they have also made some changes to the Cinematograph Act by giving certain additional powers. So, two things have happened of 1952, and some additional powers have also been given, which are, of course, a problem. So, two things have happened, and both of these two things must be understood in the thank you, Syed. And those are the things that we have to understand in the context here. So, the the amendments to the Cinematograph Act that we are referring to, right, of 1952, have come because we have dissolved the FCAT tribunal in 2021. When I discuss tribunals with you, I'll have a beautiful discussion on how the evolution of tribunals is also an issue of independence of judiciary and judicial review. We'll come to that. So, under the Tribunal Reforms Act of 2021, which was later also authorized by an act, the Film Certificate Appellate Tribunal has been abolished. So, there are basically two things that have happened from the tribunal's point of view. In 2017, several tribunals were cancelled, and then in 2021 several of them have been merged also. Like, for example, we don't have a competition law tribunal anymore. The competition law tribunal has been merged with the company law tribunal. So now the company law tribunal, the National Company Law Tribunal, is also going to look into competition law cases, right? So we've sort of we've consolidated and we've rationalized the number of tribunals that should exist. Anyways, so the Ministry for Information and Broadcasting has basically proposed that the central government is going to get this brand new term called revisionary powers, wherein anybody who complains to the center or the censor board, and this is the problem, anybody who complains can to the center that, you know what, the censor board has released this movie, but you know there is this thing which is objectionable about this movie, or this movie should not have been allowed to exist in the first place. Then the Ministry for Information and Broadcasting can direct the Central Board for Film Certification to re-examine a film that has already been approved for public exhibition. मतलब you can withdraw the film, you can retract the film, you can ask the film to be stopped from screening in theaters even if it already had. मतलब एक हफ्ते पहले रिलीज हुई है, अब बंद कर दो. Now understand this problem. This means a film which was passed by the Central Board for Film Certification, which is a statutory authority, which has been given proper powers, can actually be recensored at the will of the union government, right? And therefore, this can have a catastrophic impact on the producers, on the makers of the film, who would have spent a countless sum of rupees on the production of the movie, on paying the fees of the actors, from the marketing, the distribution, and the publicity budgets. And a lot of this is dependent on theatrical releases. You and I make a Salman Khan movie, a multi-hundred crore movie. You and I are responsible for Bhai being Bhai, right? So this is the problem, and this is something we must be able to solve. And that is why what ends up happening is, if you're going to create that kind of a culture, then the producers and the directors will not make movies which could potentially be objectionable, could be politically misunderstood, and somebody could go to the central government, or the central government or any political party could be motivated enough to do this, and therefore you could stop the movie from being screened, right? So that is an issue. All right. Now, the amendment would also, therefore, override the authority of a body like CBFC. Then, what is the point of having an independent authority? And it is also slightly confusing. It's because, see, on one hand, the members of the censor board are also appointed by the government only. Now, you are saying the government can override its own members that you have appointed in the first place. Then, what is the whole point of this shenanigan called the Central Board for Film Certification, right? And undermine the authority of it, which would, of course, ironically be appointed. Now, very interestingly, in 2000, in the Shankarappa versus Union of India, the Supreme Court has very clearly said that once the film has been certified, and it has been certified in compliance with the Cinematographic Act, there should not be any further interference. And if you do that, then that would amount to a violation of separation of powers. The elected executive is interfering with the functions of the permanent executive. The Central Board of Film Certification is the permanent executive. It's an independent body, and the executive cannot override the decision of the judiciary. Which means that once, say for example, a court has said you can do this, the court has given a green sheet after an appeal from censor board, then even after the judgment you go up to the government and say no, but this can't be done. What about that? What about, say, there is a film X which has been released, this X which has been produced, the censor board said no, you went to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court said yes, the film was released, then somebody went and complained to the central government and said no, the film should not be released, then the central government tells the censor board to stop the release of the film. This will also undermine the Supreme Court, right? So such a simple issue has such complicated repercussions, and this is exactly how your larger ecosystem of censorship and the cinema works. Okay, understood this? Are we clear on this? There are so many places that you could use and these points in. Of course, apart from this, there are no clarifications on who can complain, and therefore this could be politically misused, as I've already explained to you, right? So now we are going to take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to understand the new IT rules very specifically in the context of OTT platforms. Okay, we're not going to get into privacy at the moment. We're going to understand the new IT rules in the context of OTT platforms, right? So you can take a 5-minute break, and then we'll start at 11:35. Okay, thank you. All right. You can send them to me, Rishav. Absolutely, I'll have a look at them. Thanks, Akash. Thanks. Let's continue, and let's get down to some of my personal interest is in OTT, because it's new. There's technology, there is law, there is so much that goes on in and around. I personally get very excited to teach topics like this. Chalo, let's come to OTT platforms. What we're going to do is we'll understand OTT platforms and the regulation of OTT platforms with respect to Article 19 as to what has happened and where is the problem. So, as we were discussing this before, OTT platforms are largely self-regulated, and the reason they are self-regulated is because the IT Act provides through the IT rules a set of frameworks, a set of frameworks which permit for them to be self-regulated. So the procedures, the guidelines for self-regulated movies, for self-regulated organizations, it's because of the IT Act. So how does this work is, the IT Act says we will have a bunch of IT rules, and the IT rules of 2021 give you guidelines on the basis of which OTT platforms are going to be self-regulated, right? They're going to be self-regulated. So let's understand exactly what the context is. Let's understand the journey of OTT platforms, so to speak, right? So let's get this part right. Let's understand exactly what we are going to be referring to. All right. So let us start. Okay. So let us start now. You see, when we discuss the censorship of online platforms, we must fundamentally understand that India, being a democratic country, will of course be able to perform any and every method of expression, and there is no greater expression than the creative expression. And when you compare OTT platforms to films, OTT platforms tend to be more diverse, they tend to be more representative. They also give opportunity for talent which would have otherwise not made it to mainstream, and would have also ensured, to a larger extent, movie issues or subjects or arenas which would have not passed the censor filter to therefore be available to larger audiences. And a fundamental advantage that OTT platforms have with everybody else is that it is anytime, anywhere content. So you could be sitting anywhere in the country, as long as you have a mobile phone with internet on it, you should be able to access OTT platform content. Right now, that does not necessarily mean that the OTT platform content is all hunky dory and they're the best people on the planet. I mean, let's be very honest. While some of my beloved colleagues, glorify how life is about Mirzapur, but you must also understand that these are very objectionably, sensational platforms. I mean, if you think about this, there is a problem. There will always going to be a problem. If you are able to show such violence, such sexuality, such vulgarity, with such amount of in such an in a very unabashedly open format, it is going to be effective, because you must understand that people of all age groups are able to access OTT content, right? It's no longer about you going to a cinema hall and watching an adult film. So therefore there is in fact a greater responsibility for OTT platforms to maintain a balance between creative expression and public morality. So, and that is exactly why OTT platforms have to be understood in that sense, right? Now, of course, from street drama to motion pictures to CDs to DVDs to films, from the Cinematograph Act of 1952, today we are in the age of digital technology, in the age of digital entertainment, right? And therefore we have to make sure that the platforms that we are talking about are able to pass all of these yardsticks, right? So So let us start and let's understand this as to how this could be done. Okay, so if I have to firstly teach you the growth and the evolution of OTT platforms, you must understand that OTT platforms are largely divided into three phases. Now these phases are not historically timelined, but they are essentially very loosely termed phases to understand how the industry has grown. Very recently, the Price House Water Coopers, which is one of India's and one of the world's big four, have projected that by 2024, OTT platforms industry is going to be the sixth largest. The Indian OTT platforms are going to be the sixth largest in the world, and this is not something to be proud of. That's largely because of 130 crore people that we have in the country. So every time somebody says we are the largest, it's not something which is always necessarily a good thing. It is also because of the sheer number of people that we have in the country. Right. So let's understand this. Let's understand the evolution of OTT platforms across phase 1, 2, and 3, and you'll understand how this works in the context of Article 19. Right. So now this is these are the three phases. Like these are the exact same three phases like that of a relationship. The first phase of the relationship is where everybody is trying to please everybody, है ना? Everybody is being very nice about each other. Everybody is being very nice about following the rules, following the best practices, better than best practices. So that's essentially what phase 1 of this entire ecosystem is. So in phase 1, you will see that very conventional content, very little experimentation, very little objection. This is to ensure that these OTT platforms are able to seamlessly enter the Indian market. You don't enter the Indian market with a Mirzapur. You don't enter the Indian market with something which could be understood as objectionable. You enter the Indian market with standard content like Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum, Kal Ho Na Ho, Bagban. These are the things that you enter the Indian market with, so that people are able to access all of this easily, right? Therefore it is an early stage where you're trying to establish without any controversy surrounding you, and so on and so forth, right? And then comes phase 2. And in phase 2, this is where the problem is. This is, if there is a moment that has to be pinpointed, if I have to tell you that this is where phase 2 of OTT platforms start, like the relationship, there'll be one of the other people said, can we sleep early? Can you do your own thing? Why do you have to, right? So this is the entry of sacred games. And sacred games marks the start of phase 2 of OTT platforms, where you have this series which is of course objectionable on so many counts, in terms of the vulgarity, in terms of the violence, in terms of the creative liberty, in terms of the political sensitivity, and Sacred Games was welcomed with a lot of FIRs because of the content of it, right? So that's essentially what phase 2 is, and this is where the government started encouraging that, listen, I understand that you are in a digital platform, which means that we can't really regulate you through an institution per se, because what if the movie is not made in India, right? Or if it is being telecasted over a geographical space. That is why self-regulation seemed to be an easier and a more inclusive way to going about OTT. And that's the start of phase 3, right? And that's the sort of start of phase 3. So this is when the government started providing for self-regulation. They said, what, you guys figure it out, come up with your own self-regulators, do whatever it is that you want to, because several people had started going to the courts, several people had started asking for X show to be banned, Y show to be banned, X part to be cut, and so on and so forth. And which is why these video on demand providers in phase 2 primarily got divided into two groups, right? They got primarily divided into two groups. Now, one of them was set up by these leading OTT providers. They are called the Indian Broadcasting Federation, which later became the Indian Broadcasting and Digital Media Foundation. So this was one of those. In the exam, you don't have to write any of this. Don't worry. This is just to explain to you what the hell is going on, right? So that is one. And the second was, of course, the Digital Media Content Regulatory Council. The Digital Media Content Regulatory Council. Right? This is how phase 2 was happening. Phase 2 was happening with self-regulation without any intervention of the government. Then in phase 3, this is where things became, slightly more, complex. The government said, idhar आ, नहीं होगा तेरे से, तू छोड़ दे, मैं बता रहा क्या करेगा. You will set up IT rules. The government releases the IT rules of 2021, right? Now these IT rules have a lot of impact. Some parts of these IT rules have an issue with respect to your social media providers, where the whole WhatsApp originator of the message issue, Twitter going against it in the Delhi High Court. That's a separate issue. Another part of this, this specific issue is to do with OTT platforms. So in this, the government gave very clear guidelines that this is exactly what your self-regulators are supposed to do. There is supposed to be a code of ethics, there is supposed to be a redressal officer, a grievance officer, and so on and so forth. We're going to have a very detailed, organizational structure, and your self-regulators will actually work under the supervision of the IT rules that have been framed. So now you're going to have proper classifications. Like remember how I was telling you, for censorship you have U for universal, A for adult, UA for adult supervision, S for specialized audiences like doctors, scientists, etc. But here you're going to have a more diverse certification practice. So while censor board gave you UA, UA and S, here you would have, for example, universal, then adult supervision 7 years, adult supervision 13 years, then adult, and every TV show will have a certificate to be displayed with parental controls on the platform, and so on and so forth, right? So these are the things that has to be on classification of content. Then you'll have a compliance officer. Then these reports have to be sort of released and reported to the government, and so on and so forth. So it is through the IT rules that now you have what is called guided self-regulation. Now you have something called guided self-regulation. Guided self-regulation. And this guided self-regulation, and as we know guided self-regulation to be, this is something which is essentially the essence and the component of it all. We have to be very clear about this. We have to be absolutely certain about this, and under these provisions now you have several self-regulators. ठीक है, जैसे for example Amazon, Prime, Netflix, Z, MX Player, they are in one organizational group. Disney Hotstar, All Balaji, जिस पर गंदी बात आता है, all of that are in one broadcasting group. So now we've done this. In the exam, nobody is going to ask you the composition of this. It is not even in your syllabus. Nobody is going to ask you this. But what you need to know here is how are we regulating OTT platforms in the context of Article 19, right? So freedom of speech, yes. Reasonable restrictions, yes. And the reason why we had to do this is because the material itself, the kind of content that was being delivered needed some form of self-regulation, needed some form of restrictions. Otherwise, there is no end to it. And two, you must understand that there were often differential treatments given to different providers. A cinematographic act is for films. Then you have your TV, your cable TV, or Tata Sky sort of people. For that you have the Cable Television Act, which includes direct to home participants. अब दोनों के लिए तुमने कानून बना दिए. तीसरे के लिए भी तो बनाओ, फिल्म है, टीवी है और नेटफ्लिक्स है, फिल्म और टीवी तो रेगुलेटेड है, नेटफ्लिक्स के लिए भी कोई कुछ तो फॉर्म का रेगुलेशन होना चाहिए. एंड इफ देयर इज नो नेटफ्लिक्स वाला फॉर्म ऑफ रेगुलेशन, देन ऑफ कोर्स देयर इज गोइंग टू बी अ प्रॉब्लम, राइट. एंड थर्ड, you must understand that today when you have the Internet and Mobile Association of India and so on and so forth, you must understand that at some point of time we will have to take care of this. We will have to make sure that there is some form of grievance redressal, there is some form of accountability in that entire process. Okay? And of course, several Supreme Court and High Court judgments through the last 10 years or so have always said that there must be some form of screening, some form of an oversight as far as OTT platforms are concerned, so that we are able to create some form of legitimacy also, right? Like for example, there was this web series called Tandav, which was, as politically surcharged as anything else. The courts were very clear that, you screen these content, no problem at all. But when you're screening it, there must be some sort of oversight, some sort of framework in process, right? And that is how the IT rules of 2021 came into existence, right? Okay. Yes, Vaibhav. Guided is phase number 3. Oh yes, there should be. Sharad, absolutely. Online gaming is not just about addiction. Beta Sharad, online gaming is also an issue of online gambling. Online gaming तो मैं समझ गया आप जिसकी बात कर रहे हो, which is in fact in the US there are several guidelines and there are several court judgments, because what happens is that these gaming companies, EA Sports, Ubisoft, they design these games, and these are very neurologically designed to stimulate that part of your brain which keeps you addicted to it. You forget about eating, you forget about sleeping, and all you want to do is keep playing games and games and games. And it is a and these are designed to keep you addicted, no doubt. That is one element of it. But if you think about it, poker, online poker, or mobile Premier League, or Dream 11, these are also games, but these are games which have a gambling component. So in the technological space, there is gaming plus gambling, there is entertainment, there is so much that actually needs to be regulated in the current context of things that are today. अभी खुद ही सोचो ना, PS5, PlayStation 5, मतलब पीएमओ से कहलवाना पड़ेगा अगर PlayStation 5 चाहिए. अब इतना बड़ा स्मार्ट बोर्ड लगाया है मैंने, अब मैं पढ़ाऊंगा थोड़ी ना 12 घंटे, मैं इसमें टीवी देखूंगा, मैं इसमें गेम खेलूंगा. करेक्ट, टीवी नहीं है, मैं ये टीवी हो गया मेरा. करेक्ट. सो दैट इज ऑल्सो समथिंग दैट वी हैव टू लुक इनटू, राइट? सो दैट इज ऑल्सो देयर, राइट? सो या. Yes, money heist also. Yes, Microsoft bought Activision yesterday for 67 billion. Yes, Activision is the same people who created the Spider-Man game, and we all know how incredibly addictive the Spider-Man game is, right? Yeah. So Call of Duty, Uncharted, Spider-Man, all of these games. Yeah. Absolutely. ठीक है. So these are your OTT platforms. Yes. ठीक है. So ये cover हो गया. Article 19 completely covered, completely done, sorted, and we've covered all the essential ingredients that we needed to know as far as Article 19 is concerned. ठीक है, done. Now, okay, done. अब ये कवर हो गया पूरा का पूरा, ठीक है. Now we are left with privacy, which includes privacy, LGBTQ, youth in Asia, and then we are going to cover reservation to a larger extent. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one more class tomorrow on fundamental rights, और उसके बाद we'll be done with fundamental rights, directive principles and duties, and then we will start with the president, the parliament and the council of ministers day after. I just wanted to run you through the basic the plan that I have for you. The plan is today is, I think, today is, one second, today is the 20th. So theme number 3 is going to be completed by the 21st of January, and 21st of January is going to be a Friday, right? Then theme number 4, which includes the president, the governor and the council of ministers, center and states, will take about 3 days maximum, 2.5 actually, because this is not difficult at all. This is going to take 3 days. So 22nd, 23rd, 24th of Jan, we'll finish this. Then another 3 days, actually 3 to 4 days, actually 3 days is more than enough, for parliament and state legislatures, let's say 4 days. By 27th of Jan, we should be done with parliament and state legislatures. Then theme number 6, center state including emergency, is going to take 2 days, which is 29th of Jan. Then judiciary is going to take 2 days, 31st of Jan. Local self-government is going to take 1.5 days, so say 2nd of February. And then bodies are going to take 3 days, which is say the 4th or the 5th of February. And then separation of powers and checks and balances is going to take another 2 to 3 days. This will cover by the 7th or the 8th of February. I am targeting your entire polity syllabus. I am an absolute gamer. I'm an absolute gamer, Akash. Right. So by the 7th or the 8th of February, it'll all be done. Yes. These items, are they retrospective in nature? No, they are not retrospective in nature. They haven't been made retrospective. I hope this is clear. So I'm keeping 2 days of buffer. My target is that your polity syllabus will be completed entirely for the 2022 batch by the 10th February 2022. Okay, you have 2 classes every day in the morning. We'll have 1.5 hours to 2 hours every day, and we will be done, right? Yes. Saurabh, my opinion on marital rape I'll discuss in the privacy debate, and it's not going to be my opinion. It's going to be the opinion that you should write in the exam. My opinion is irrelevant, right? Okay. Yes. Understood this? Yes. Okay. All right. Done. By 10th February, your entire polity syllabus should be done with 1.5 to 2 hours every day, so that it's not, too stressful for you, because you have 2 classes every day. But easily by 10th of February, we should be done with your entire polity syllabus. Okay? Sorted. Are we okay with this? Yes? Cinema is not self-regulatory because they didn't intend it to. They could have made it so. Right? And between 10th and 15th of February, I will record all the governance classes and give them to you. Okay? Why do A certificate movies need cuts? Because everything adult does not mean it is still okay. Something a bit too adult also, na beta? Yes, the gamer. Yes, Yash. Yes. Rishabh, you can send it to me on an email. Okay, done. So that it's taken care of, it is sorted. All right, thank you. See you. Bye.